My name is John MacColl. I'm the University Librarian, University of St Andrews in Scotland, and I'm the chair of the RLU Research Data Management Working Group. And it's my pleasure to be your chair for this afternoon's session. So this is a lengthier session than this morning in the sense that we have more speakers. We have 5 speakers this afternoon. We're going to have 3 before the break and 2 after the break, and then we're going to have some discussion time, and then I think we go for drinks at the University of Amsterdam. So if you can hang on till 4:30, you'll get your reward. The theme for the afternoon session is supporting change at the university level. And what we're going to be looking at are the requirements for research support in 3 particular areas: research data management, open access to scholarly publications, and research assessment. And I'm just going to preface these presentations with just a few comments of my own to get us going. And I should say that these comments are made with a particular UK perspective, since that's my environment, that's the environment I know best. But hopefully some of them are more general. So professionally, we live increasingly in an inside-out environment. But our academic colleagues and those who do publishing still require certification and fixity. So for those of us who were at the workshop yesterday, we looked at that new report from OCLC on the emerging scholarly research environment. So that provided a very useful template, and I think we have to think about certification and fixity, still absolutely critical to scholarly publishing. And the reputation of our faculty colleagues, our academic colleagues, is based on a conservative worldview, probably a necessarily conservative worldview, but a worldview that is conservative in a way that quite often frustrates us, I think, in the library community, because we can see ways in which it seems things could be done more efficiently. But there are good reasons, if you're an academic, for not necessarily going for those more efficient ways of publishing. Business models are in transition. And have been really since the electronic environment arrived and the web arrived. The first phase of that transition was from what I would call publisher print to publisher digital. And this was at the time when particularly e-journals arrived with a vengeance into our environments. We got the arrival of the big deal, and we began to understand how publishing was now being done and to adapt our systems to deal with it. I think we're now in a new phase, and have been for the last several years, which I would say is a deconstructive phase, which is based on a reassessment of the values of scholarly publishing. So we're now starting to question again why it is that the academic community, which produces its own academic research outputs in the form of journal articles and does so for no payment, and does not just the writing of the papers, but the editing and the peer review and the editing of journals, and therefore has the means of doing this within itself, within the academy. Why is it that we can't simply switch across to that kind of an environment? And why do we still need journals? You probably will think, well, there are lots of good reasons why we still need journals. Certainly, we've discovered that we certainly do need them, and that the academics regard them as really important for their research careers and their reputations. But nonetheless, we're in a deconstructive phase, I think, and among the reasons for that are the very high costs of publisher content. So despite the fact that we've had the big deal around for a long time and we've had open access around for a long time, we're still finding that although we've maybe checked the growth and increase in publisher prices in many cases, we haven't stopped those publisher journal prices staying above the rate of inflation year after year after year, and therefore still presenting us with a sustainability challenge. So we have a responsibility as librarians for the sustainability of the scholarly record, and that means keeping on being able to afford to purchase these journals as they appear. And another reason why I think we're in a new phase, a deconstructive phase, a phase which is particularly based around open access now, is the emergence of public accountability arguments. So when open access first appeared sort of 10, 11 years ago, I remember at that time I worked at the University of Edinburgh. We developed an institutional repository. We began to encourage our academics to give us copies of their papers to put in the repository. And back then, what was making us particularly indignant was the rate of increase of scholarly journals. We used to look at that graph from the ARL that showed the price rocketing for journals compared to monographs, and saying, how on earth can we continue to sustain this? And we thought open access might give us some means of countering that rate of increase. But more recently, open access has emerged with an association with accountability for public money, public funding. So we now say open access is about saying to the taxpayer, well, you're funding this system, therefore you have a right to access these outputs that you have paid for. And therefore, we need to find ways of making these outputs available for free on the web. And that's a large reason why we have a new impetus, I think, behind open access at the moment. I think what these three new areas of research library activity have in common, particularly at the present time, is the intervention of research funders into the administration of research within universities. So we're now seeing the funders intervening in our universities and in the way we manage and administer research. Research funders no longer simply conduct their own administration around the grants they award. That's what they used to do. They used to obviously have to make sure that they maintained a record of what they were funding and were accountable to their own paymasters for that record. But they allowed us in the universities to do our own administration. And of course, we still had to prove that the research was being done, but we didn't have to make sure that our outputs were in conformance with something that the funders wanted. Now the funders are saying, we want those outputs to be open access, we want this data to be open data, and we will make this a condition of grant funding. So they're imposing, and certainly this is true in the UK, they're imposing conditions upon funding that require university compliance. We now have compliance has emerged into the library world as a very big theme. This is carrot and stick funding, which is particularly prevalent in countries with significant levels of public funding of university-based research. And that's very true of the UK. I think it's true of the Netherlands. It's true of many of the countries in continental Europe. Less true of the UK. It's true in Canada. It's true in Australia. It's true in many countries in the world where open access and research data management are now becoming big issues of concern for libraries and big areas where libraries are being required to manage new systems of scholarly research output management. So research funders have recognized their responsibility to ensure that the funds they disperse are used ethically, efficiently, and transparently. And that's why they have come on board the open access agenda recently and are now beginning to enter the research data management agenda as well. Where research assessment is concerned, funders take different approaches in different countries. And I remember when I worked for OCLC Research for 3 years before my current job, and we did a 5-country comparison of research assessment regimes across 5 countries to see what the differences were. We included the Netherlands, I believe, in that assessment. And what we certainly proved, I think, in that report was that the UK is the most research assessment obsessed country in the world. And in the UK, what used to be called the research assessment exercise has transformed itself in the last couple of instances into, or at least in the last instance, which has just been completed, into something called the Research Excellence Framework. It's no longer actually about assessment. It's about re-engineering the university system, the research system in UK universities, into a system that, if you like, separates out those institutions which are excellent and do excellent research from the rest. And that allows the government, which is the paymaster, to concentrate its resources more effectively. That may be a slightly cynical view, but that's certainly the way I see it. The UK government has also recently taken a direct interest in open access publishing, strongly supporting the gold route or the transition to open access journals in the Finch report of 2012. And we in RL UK have welcomed this backing for gold open access and the attempt to create a new market in funder pays or supply-driven scholarly publishing. But we are still wary of publisher motives, and I think we need to be. So on the one hand, we can see the arguments for creating a new market in open access publishing based on open access journals, but we also have to be a bit worried about the way the publishers are behaving in this new world. The UK's research councils also backed the gold open access route, making new money available to research universities to prime a market in open access. The most recent funder intervention has been from the Higher Education Funding Councils of the UK, which in a very overt carrot and stick intervention in the form of a report earlier this year, have mandated that all outputs to be considered for the next Research Excellence Framework, what they call the post-2014. We tend to do it every 6 years, so it's probably going to be 2020, has said that all those outputs will need to be open access. This is potentially a game changer in the UK. And those open access outputs may be either gold or green. The funding councils have a slight change of emphasis from the research councils. They're preferring steering towards a green route with a lot of emphasis on repositories and embargoes and affordability. But gold or green will do. Either, I think, is going to be acceptable, but it's up to the libraries in the universities to ensure that these publications are managed in an open access environment. In the research data management area, one of the UK's research councils, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, has stated that all grants awarded from May 2015 next year will require research data management plans to be in place. So this has also energised UK research universities to develop management and administrative capacity for data management and policy compliance. And a relatively recent trend is that this responsibility has been vested in the library. So increasingly, research university libraries are taking on responsibility for management and compliance in research data management too. This is all UK context, where funder intervention is greater than most other countries, and more funding is at stake. We know that the US has funder intervention too in open access, particularly with the NIH, but no national research assessment regime tied to it. And I'm sure that's something that you're very relieved about if you work in the US. Most continental European countries have forms of research assessment, but without the explicit linkage to large proportions of government research funding. So in all of these areas, the libraries of research universities have important roles to play, both institutionally and collectively. And in our session this afternoon, we're going to hear from a number of speakers around each of these three areas from a variety of national perspectives. My Scottish colleague, John Scally from the University of Edinburgh, will begin, and then he will be followed by Dreek Heathhackers, and they will in turn overview the support activity going on in research data management, both within their own universities and more broadly within the UK and the Netherlands respectively. So they'll give us institutional and national perspectives. Paul Wouters from the University of Leiden will talk about the library role in research assessment and tools available for measurement. Micah Altman from MIT will take a systemic view of the research support infrastructure, looking at the question of researcher identification to support two of the activities under scrutiny, open access and research assessment. And finally, Paolo Manghi, can't remember which institution you work for in Italy, but it's CNR in Italy, okay. Right, we'll take a look at the data infrastructure which underpins each of the three areas. And then we'll have some discussion. So as I say, 3 before the break, 2 after the break, then discussion, then drinks. So we should get started. So can I begin by inviting John Scally from the University of Edinburgh to come up and talk about the library's role in research data management and Edinburgh case study.